Welcome, everybody. If you don't know me, I'm Nate Pryor. I'm the national president of CAPE. And I'm really, really happy to have two of our guests here with us today. I'll give them a proper introduction here in a second, but we do have Rachel Bashara from the PSAC and Robert Seguin from PIPS to join us to talk about just how bargaining is going. Just a few more housekeeping things, though, before I kind of move into my general remarks, and then I'll try to shut up and let our guests do most of the talking here. But there is simultaneous interpretation available for this event. So if you want to enable French interpretation, you want to click on the little globe. Sometimes you'll have to click the more button with the three dots. Find the little globe button that says interpretation at the bottom of your screen. Just so everyone knows, this meeting is being recorded. And I encourage you to introduce yourselves in the chat and to comment as we go. Each of our speakers is going to have about 10 minutes to present what's happening at their respective bargaining tables, and we'll follow that with a Q&A. I'll be moderating that. There's going to be a lot of time for questions, and if you have submitted a question in advance, we've given those already to Robert and Rachel. Yeah, let me just jump into it here, and I want to get to our guests. So, this year, almost every union in the federal public sector is in bargaining, one of their units at least with the Treasury Board. It's a pretty pivotal moment right now. We're facing pretty unprecedented attacks, really historic attacks on the public service on the whole. We're seeing key program services being, cut down to the bone, scaled back, some of which are being, publicly owned and delimited, but most of which are not. There's just huge cuts happening across the board as if program neutrality is possible in that context. And, federal public servants were blamed for a deficit that they didn't cause. And then we have this, pretty messed up, quote unquote, solution to that, which is to start at laying off tens of thousands of workers without having said we're going to cut these programs, without having said we've got a plan to staff up on all of the commitments that we just made. But on top of that, without any consultation, Carney's government is forcing you back into the office 4 days a week this July, right? And that's, you're already probably working on teams that are being cut right, left, and center, and then you're being asked to be even less productive in the current work that you probably are overloaded on right now. Maybe your job's even under threat. But with RTO4, we're talking about going back into completely inadequate offices. A lot of us aren't even going to be going back to the office 4 days a week because they just don't have the space. And those of us that are, I'm sure this is the case for a lot of you. I know there's exceptions to this, but a lot of us are working without any proper equipment, without a real workspace. A lot of departments, they said outright, we cannot do this in July because we just don't have the space. So the idea that we are going back to the office more days a week to make us less productive in the middle of a national crisis that we're very much still in, and on top of the fact that, what was not considered in the comprehensive expenditure review, it was reducing real estate costs. And that's one of the huge things that we really have to scream to the mountaintops here. TBS, just like Doug Ford in Ontario, just like the big six banks just before that, and all of those things are connected, is rushing this through, this huge return to the office without even trying to justify it anymore. I don't know if you saw Bill Matthews, the secretary for the Treasury Board, justifying it the other day, but he said it was just a philosophical choice. It was vibes. So they're not even really trying anymore. They're kind of saying, what are you going to do about it? And I think if we're left to guess why they're actually doing it and why they're being so, clammed up about why they're doing it, it's because they're propping up commercial real estate. And we're seeing more and more evidence of that being exactly the case right now, but they aren't trying to justify it. We don't have a smoking gun on that, but they are sending a clear message. They care a lot more about either some extremely outdated workplace model that we proved made us less productive. We were actually, this is StatsCan data, it was documented that we were more productive in a completely unsupported remote work experiment at the first years of the lockdowns of the pandemic. And they haven't even tried since then. They have not even tried to say, this is why this is beneficial for productivity in the public sector. This is why this is beneficial to taxpayers. And so we're left to guess. But this is a top demand for a lot of bargaining units out there. There's hundreds of thousands of public servants that know exactly why we need to win remote work rights. We've seen remote work rights won in other contexts too. The Australian Public Service has this very strongly in their collective agreement right now, where the employer has to justify why somebody needs to be in the office, and that's the starting point for that conversation. We saw very similar bargaining gains made by the StatsCan of the UK, the Office of National Statistics. And they, backed off of a strike threat for 2 straight years. And eventually the conditions were right where the policy was written, and they have flexible remote work rights now, just at that one employer. That's still a bigger fight in the UK. But This is a really important moment for the public sector. We're all under attack, under this ideological attack that hasn't really been thought through or isn't really being justified. And of course, like the connection with you, your job, austerity to the remote work question is a pretty direct one too. If you think about just the amount of money that could be saved and that wasn't even considered through this, you know, PSPC, Public Services and Procurement Canada's own data said to us that they could save, and this is in like an aggressive scenario, they could save up to $40 billion with remote work rights and downsizing on real estate. So we have to win this fight, not just for the workplace issue that it is, and that's a huge issue like this. We are more productive if you're neurodivergent, if you have kids, if you have care responsibilities, telework makes all the sense in the world. If you don't want to commute for 2 hours a day just to do remote work at the office, it's a massive workplace issue, but it's also an issue to all those Canadians out there who are seeing their taxpayer dollars just thrown down the toilet here, frankly. And so this is a moment now where unions are collaborating, they're working together to build more common leverage on a lot of issues, not just on remote work, but also on remote work, on WFA, because 300,000 workers demanding telework or a better workforce adjustment directive, and CAPE for the first time ever will be bargaining that into our collective agreement. And part of the reason we wanted to bring in PIPS and PSAC specifically is because they have bargained that into their collective agreement, and they're also facing attacks on that. And I'm sure that our speakers here will get into that. But 300,000 workers across the federal public sector demanding better is a lot more powerful than the 28,000 ECs that we could talk about right now. So this attack on public servants, it's illogical, of course. We can say that as many times as we want, but we have to think in terms of power, and we have to rethink how we negotiate. And so, the ECs and the TRs at CAPE are negotiating this fall. Both of those groups have adopted open bargaining. If you're just hearing about open bargaining for the first time, that's a pretty collaborative, member-driven process that's really aiming to dramatically increase rank and file participation in bargaining and ownership of the contract. Because of that, you are directly steering strategy. You are hearing, there's no confidentiality rules with TBS. We are telling you what's happening at the table, and we're talking about it on a regular basis. And so in practice so far, this has meant that we, for the first time ever, elected a 38-member EC bargaining committee. It's the only bargaining committee that we've ever elected in CAPE across all departments. And we had a 17-member TR bargaining committee. We use the bargaining survey as an organizing tool. And by organizing, we mean reaching systematically every member on the shop floor. So one-on-one conversations were directly used to do a lot of that work. And for the TRs, that meant that 56% of their members filled out the bargaining survey. That shattered the record on that. And for the ECs, we were a bit lower, but we still shattered our own record. And we went from 20% on the last one to 32% now. So those numbers are going up. Way more people are involved in having these conversations. And then the big thing that's coming up for the ECs that the TRs have already done is that we, for the first time ever, are actually debating and voting on what our top priorities are going to be at the bargaining table. So we filled out the bargaining survey, but now we're going to have proposals from the bargaining committee about these should be our priorities. We're going to vote on that. And then we're also going to vote on this pretty arcane thing that's pretty specific to the federal public sector, which is choosing your dispute resolution mechanism, which means you bind your hands based on that choice, based on what you can do. And this crucial decision is being put to members to vote on for the first time, and that's coming up for ECs in June. I'm not going to take up all the time here on that. We've had a bunch of education events around that, and then there's information sessions that are starting May 28th, so watch for that. But the TRs did finish voting on it last month, and they voted 97.4% in favor of their bargaining committee's platform and 91% in favor of conciliation as their path. And that's the first time that a CAPE group has ever chosen that path. And that's huge. There's way more people involved in the union right now. There's way more people involved in winning a contract for themselves and their coworkers than ever before. And so we're going to hear more from Rachel and Robert here, what's going on in other classifications, what's going on at their bargaining table, why they chose a certain path. And then we're also going to talk a bit about like what the moment that we find ourselves in. But anyway, I'm going to stop now. I'm really excited to hear from Rachel and Robert tonight. They'll have very important insights on what we can do now to start building more leverage across these lines and what to expect as ECs and TRs, frankly, as we begin negotiations fully in the fall. So I'll just quickly introduce folks, but I'm going to turn to Rachel first to kick us off. But just for a quick introduction, Rachel Bashara, for the past 18 years, she's worked for the Public Service Alliance of Canada, PSAC, first as an education officer, now as a national negotiator. And Rachel negotiates for bargaining units from coast to coast, including at the PA group, the Program and Administrative Services table with the Treasury Board. Her work spans a wide range of sectors, workplaces, but a pretty consistent theme throughout her career has been really pushing fighting for dignity, fairness, and respect for workers. So really happy to have Rachel here. But before I move to Rachel, I'll just quickly introduce Robert, and he'll be up next. Robert Séguin is a negotiator with PIPS, the Professional Institute of the Public Service of Canada. He's a negotiator that's assigned to the IT group, which is information technology professionals that are in the core public administration of the federal government, and they've gone up before us, and they have a little bit more information about what's happening now at these tables. So I'll turn to Rachel first to kick us off, share what's happening at the PA bargaining table. She's going to have about 10 minutes to speak, and then we'll turn to Robert to share about the IT group, and after that, we should have about 20 minutes for questions. So without further ado, Rachel, take it away.
All right. Thanks so much, Nate. I appreciate you having both of us here tonight, and thanks to all of you for joining. I'll just say right off the bat, I'm getting over a cold, so please forgive me. I'm a little hoarse this evening, but I'll work through it. And I have to really say it is always very, very exciting when our unions can come together to build solidarity and our collective strength for all the reasons that Nate's already covered, but also because right now it is the most critical thing that we can do as workers and as unions. I'm going to also apologize by starting off being a bit heavy with the hard truth, folks, because what we are seeing right now, Nate described it. We're in the fight of our lives with this government, and its austerity mandates right now in terms of collective bargaining. What we're seeing all across Canada, in fact, is an attack on workers and on our collective agreements. So we have to think about how we can organize differently to make the gains that we want to see, but also, to be very frank, even to protect the rights that we currently have. On this note, let me start by thanking CAPE for your collective bargaining committee's visible support on April 30th for Wear Black Day. I have the picture that we all saw. The PSAC's TC and SV tables were in bargaining that week, and the PA table was in mediation. And all of our teams saw this picture, and we were incredibly invigorated by the support. So thank you very much for that. The Wear Black Day is actually an excellent example of a very easy and accessible way to demonstrate our collective strength. And it actually was a group of grassroots activists that started this, PSAC members in the Prairies region. And it just spread far and wide quite quickly because it was such an accessible and easy way to demonstrate solidarity together. And we hope to keep building on that action. I was asked to come and share with you the landscape of bargaining right now. Specifically, what has happened so far, what are our main proposals, what are some of our main proposals, and what did the employer table, and how is PSAC reacting? I'll start by saying that if you go to the PSAC website, you'll find all of our proposals posted on our website for all of the different tables, and also you'll see the employer's proposals there as well. And I'm aware that for many CAPE members, as Nate mentioned, we share one of the main priorities at the PA table, which is winning telework language. So, what has happened so far? Simply, I can say not a whole lot. I should say that not a whole lot of movement. There's been a lot of activity, but not a whole lot of meaningful movement. In fact, this coming July 11th marks the 1-year date since we first met with the employer and tabled our first package of proposals. And to date, we do not have one thing signed off on yet. Since last June, we have faced numerous delay tactics, meaningless discussion, hyper focus on things like editorial matters, and pushing of concessions from the employer. And I'm going to come back to this a little bit more. Our main proposals, a number of our priority proposals are group specific, but the obvious ones, and they're safe to say that our unions share a common interest in, are, of course, wages, job security, telework, protection measures around the use of AI, and surveillance. There's a couple others I'd like to mention that relate to better protections and recourse for equity deserving groups. We've tabled a comprehensive proposal on reproductive health, as well as broadening the collective agreement's definition of harassment in the workplace beyond currently it's just defined as sexual harassment. In terms of what the employer is tabling, and as I said, you can see their package on our website, but I'll share with you what Treasury Board told us their focus was for this round of bargaining. They told us that some of the employer's negotiations objectives for this round are to preserve and enhance management authority and to continue to meet operational requirements, including through technology. And of course, to exercise fiscal responsibility. And one of the other things, of course, that they claim is that the government of Canada is committed to good faith negotiations and reaching a collective agreement that's fair to employees, mindful of economic and fiscal context, and what's reasonable for Canadians. So that's some of the objectives that they shared with us. So I'm going to just unpack these objectives a little bit more so you know what to expect. In terms of preserving and enhancing management authorities, we're seeing this in the types of concessions that the employer is advancing. So major concessions like actually trying to remove the WFA appendix from the PSAC collective agreement and to move it to the NJC, which then it just becomes about consultation rather than actual collective bargaining. And they've also proposed this with our dental care plan that is in our collective agreement. So this would, of course, diminish PSAC's current ability to negotiate improvements to WFA and to the dental care plan, which, as I said, are embedded in our collective agreements. As well, other concessions, things like, some examples, decreasing notice time for technological change, replacing employee-driven requests with employer discretion, removing any references to seniority that we may have. And while, these may seem minor on their own, these are actually aggressive means of eroding employees' rights in the workplace and replacing them with huge employer overreach and arbitrary decision-making. The other focus of meeting operational requirements, including through technology, is especially ominous. PSAC has tabled 4 different proposals related to job security and the use of technology. Excuse me. And so far, Treasury Board is refusing to discuss any of them with us. And, I'll remind you, it's been a year, so there's been lots of time. And in terms of their objective to exercise fiscal responsibility, well, we know what that looks like. And in case you haven't seen yet, 4 months after we tabled our wage proposal and repeatedly asked for a response from the employer, took 4 months for them to respond to us. When they finally did, they responded with 2% in the first year of 2025, and then 0.5 in 2026, 0.5 in 2027, and 0.5 in 2028. So in other words, this is an average of less than 1% per year over 4 years. In the current context, this is not a real wage increase. It's a loss of your purchasing power. Yes, it is an insulting offer, Samantha. You're absolutely right. So their fiscal responsibility means a complete disregard for the public service employees, for you. It means fiscal responsibility off the backs of their most important resource, you and your labor. And, really the problem is not only the amount, it's also the employer's attitude at the bargaining table. For a year, it has slowed down discussion, refused to seriously address several priorities that matter to our members. And so that is not what serious and respectful bargaining looks like. So much for the objective of being committed to good faith negotiations. The other thing I want to share with you are the roadblocks that the employer is putting in the way of reaching a tentative agreement. In January, they provided us with a document which they've characterized as a response framework. And it lays out 4 categories. The first 3 of these categories are statutory legislative framework, government direction and management rights, and fiscal direction and affordability. Under these 3 categories, they've advised us that they will not bargain anything that, in their view, falls within these 3 categories. So anything related to legislation, anything related to employer directives or directions, they refuse to bargain. The 4th category are other proposed changes to terms and conditions of employment. So this is the very tiny, small sliver of the pie where the employer recognizes proposals that are appropriately within the scope of collective bargaining. But they said that these items are assessed for cost, operational feasibility, and alignment with government priorities. So at this point, they're actually saying no to all of these proposals that fall within this category as well. Like, honestly, if I don't laugh, I might cry. So this response framework is nothing more than self-made architecture for refusing to bargain meaningfully. The PA team has actually dubbed this framework as their framework for saying no. So how are we reacting? Well, firstly, unfortunately, we've not been able to sign off on any proposals, as I mentioned. Not one thing has been resolved at the table yet. And in fact, in February, immediately after the RTO4 announcement, the PA table and the EB table filed for impasse. It's worth noting that the CR table has also, the CRA table has also declared impasse. Then last month, after Treasury Board tabled their wage proposal, their counter, our TC table also declared impasse. So 3 out of our 4 Treasury Board tables are now at impasse. Our SV group, which are mostly operational, is on the arbitration route. So they'll have a different process, and they have not yet declared impasse, but they're standing in full solidarity with the other tables that have. To be crystal clear, we filed for impasse because of how the employer is obstructing progress and because of the violation of the freeze provision by changing our members' working conditions. Yes, they did it by changing the in-office requirements, but this is the position that the bargaining teams took. It was about Treasury Board's blatant disrespect of the bargaining process. Treasury Board has responded to this by telling the media that they're bargaining in good faith, but their actions are really telling a very different story by violating statutory freeze provisions with the introduction of RTO4. While at the bargaining table, it's obvious that this commitment to fairness is really nothing more than empty words. As part of our filing for impasse, we also requested that the Federal Public Sector Labor Relations Board chair agrees to bypass the Public Interest Commission process, the PIC. Our current labor legislation under the FPSLRA was designed to slow down bargaining, create barriers for workers, and keep power in the hands of the employer. The PIC process is an unnecessary bottleneck that forces us to wait for months for movement. Our feeling is that it is a complete waste of time, and it only feeds the employer's stalling strategies. No surprise that it was introduced during the Harper era. The board chair responded to our impasse application by appointing mediators, and she is reserving her final decision on the PIC matter until May 29th. So we'll know more then. We met in mediation the last week of April, and that's when we got that beautiful act of solidarity from the CAPE bargaining committee. And we're meeting again for 2 days next week. But so far, even with the mediators, talks have not been any more productive. So right now, our focus is on mediation. We're prepared for any eventuality, and we're working to build the engagement and the momentum that we'll need for whatever comes next. In terms of RTO and its violation of the statutory freeze provision, PSAC has also filed unfair labor practice complaints with the board. But we know that this process also takes an enormous amount of time, and it is still caught up in the legal process. So this is what we're up against, folks. But here's the good news. PSAC bargaining teams are strong, united, and resolved. The employer actually provided a great mobilization gift by tabling the insulting wage offer that they did. Members are fired up, and what we're hearing is that they are hungry to take action. So we have to remember that we aren't asking for anything unreasonable, but Treasury Board seems to be treating fairness, transparency, and respect like luxuries that they can't afford. Treasury Board won't just do the right thing out of the goodness of their heart. What moves the dial is working together to build pressure and force their hand. And this is critical because the truth is, real power does not come from the bargaining table. It comes from the thousands of public service employees across the country being organized and ready to take action. Member mobilization is the strategic advantage that will push us forward. And that is what will help us win fair contracts in this round of bargaining. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Rachel. There's a lot of really good updates. By good, I mean, daunting and a lot to consider for our members to take away here, which we will definitely take questions after. We had some actually submitted before too, which you guys have in hand. But if it's okay with you, Rich, I think we'll go to Robert. And then, folks, I want you to consider what Robert is saying in relationship to what Rachel just said too, different tables, but consider how those issues and how they've been handled so far at the table kind of speak to each other. And then we can have a more general conversation that both folks can answer. Okay, so Robert, Robert Seguin from PIPS. It's all yours, Robert.
Oui, merci. It's a real pleasure to be here with Rachel from PSAC and with all the CAPE members, and really grateful for the invitation from CAPE and giving us the opportunity to build more solidarity between our unions. So I think, what I'll talk about today is essentially what happened in bargaining so far at the IT table. But I'll take a lot of the time I have to talk about why telework matters to the IT group and a lot of the rationales behind why it was such an important priority for the IT. Reading some of the questions that we received, I believe I see a lot of similarities with the EC, so maybe there's a couple of things here that will echo with your realities as well. I think a lot of the questions we had were from the EC. I recognize that there's also some TRs that may be here on the call. Um, and I think Rachel touched a lot on the major issues that relate with the employer's position in bargaining. One thing that's important to know is we are about 6 to 7 months behind the PA group. We've exchanged proposals virtually last January, and we presented them in February, and then we exchanged our initial bargaining positions in March. That was the last meeting that we had. We'll be back at the bargaining table next week and in early June. So there's more bargaining scheduled, but it still feels at our bargaining table like we are in the early days. So a lot of these responses that we know that PA group has experienced, we are kind of delayed behind that. As for what are the main proposals for the IT, Rachel touched on a lot of the ones that we have, but the members of the IT groups identified very clearly that telework was a main priority for them. and the pay disparity between the private sector and themselves, especially for IT specialists, is also an important priority. As for what the employer tabled, what we've seen before we got in bargaining the PA table, the employer proposals, a lot of them found their way in the employer proposals for the IT table. A lot more, the removing decision making from employees and trying to seep some of the employer's priorities there. So we certainly saw a lot of that. But there's their proposal package was quite thin. The main proposal that we really took issue with was trying to remove the WFA appendix from our collective agreement. That was a hard non-starter for us. Actually, we also want to see improvements in the WFA appendix. And we want to improve job security, not minimize it. So, that those are really some important priorities for the IT. What is in our telework proposals? There's really three principles, and they are, very similar to what was tabled at the PA table, very similar to what we saw as a big win for telework in Australia. There's really those three main priorities. One is that telework is voluntary, that there will be no cap on the amount of telework days for a group of employees. Essentially, we want to get rid of the directive on prescribed presence and this wall-to-wall approach from the employer. And finally, there needs to be a list of considerations that are in the collective agreement that must be used when reviewing a request to enter in a telework agreement. So those are the three main principles that we want to negotiate in the collective agreement. Now, in terms of why telework is important for the IT, we're not going to go back too much in the history, but it's important to see where the IT group was coming from when they wanted to negotiate this priority and why it's such a priority for them. With the pandemic and in the years that followed, the IT felt like they were able to prove that they can deliver for Canadians while working from home, that they can excel when Canadians needed the most. They delivered on the CERB. They delivered on, a lot of very important benefits. IT workers in the federal public service were critical in delivering these benefits for Canadians. And then there was the years of extremely high inflation. It became obvious that working remotely was able to save a lot of families from not making ends meet. Members were able to save on costs and support their local economies as well by spending closer to home. And this was a very important part of, having in these years of high inflation, there was an economic value in being able to work from home. And for the IT sector, TBS had a vision that they started to implement, which was for a workforce for digital first delivery. And that included making sure that the government expanded the suite of flexible working tools to ensure that all departments can enable telework. This was in Canada's digital ambition. And there was a chief information officer, Catherine Luello, who had this vision of what the IT workforce should look like in the federal government. And this digital ambition, it focused, among others, in hiring diversity. It led to using tools such as remote work to hire IT professionals across the country, people with disabilities, people living in different places that could be brought in the same work team thanks to the new technology. It can lead, telework can lend itself very well for neurodiverse candidates and for the federal public service to be representative of Canada. And what we saw as a result was that there's tons of IT members that are working very efficiently with team members that are across the country. These members, they embraced the vision that was pushed forward by the CIO and by the government at the time. One of a government that didn't have any boundaries and where the work could be done from anywhere. And they saw these benefits. When we did our bargaining survey last year, we also conducted several interviews with members just so that we could dive a little bit deeper in better understanding why these priorities were so important for them. And there's a couple of quotes. I'm not going to go into all of them, but there's a couple of really interesting quotes from members. And I think I saw in some of those questions, this is where I saw these echoes. To quote one member from the IT group, they said that, because your coworkers are all over the place, and it's not like before where your team is in one block, like now you're everywhere. So it's not that, you can't commute 5 minutes to go talk to a team member, then commute 5 minutes back with Teams. You can just click on the call button and then you're talking, and when you're done, you're still at your desk. And for this member, they liked it because they can set their status as a way, even when they're at their desk, or they can set a status that, don't disturb me, and they can just focus on their work. So, they can be open to chat for people for a couple of minutes, and that allows them to really focus on their work and make the work more accessible for them. Another member talked about one of the major projects that they were working on. It required them to collaborate with people from different teams in different cities all across the country. And they were able to get 100 people together, people that otherwise they would not be able to fly them into one location and sitting in a room and then working off a single spreadsheet. But now there's these collaboration tools that they're able to use, and that they were able to do an activity together very effectively. So when sometimes you just can't have all of those people, 100 people sitting in the same room talking over each other. It's just not feasible and it's not efficient. And as this member says, that's part of the problem. A lot of people don't realize how much time you actually save by being able to collaborate online from working remotely. And these benefits, our members have seen them across the board, and it really highlights why it's such an important priority for them. There's other benefits too. When we think about sick leave, there's a report that came out, it was reported on, I think, at the CBC, that employees were taking more than 2 more sick days on average per year now. And from either being in touch with other people when there's flu season, for example, or just sometimes people, they feel too sick to go to the office, but they can actually do their work from home, so they can use that flexibility. Not that we are condoning that or recommending that. If you're sick, you're sick. But our members certainly mentioned this as a benefit, and it's we can see it in the data too, and how many sick days are being used, or were being used when people were able to telework with more flexibility. So it's obvious that it's really important for the IT group members that we fight for telework. But what we're seeing, however, on the other end, is that if our resolve to win on telework is very strong, it's being met with an equally strong resolve on the employer side to continue to dictate these working conditions to our members. And this is where, when we're looking at how the employer is responding, that Treasury Board Secretary was at a parliamentary committee a couple weeks ago and said, it's a philosophical decision to bring people back to the office. I think we can extrapolate this on a couple of different ways, but one way that, I'm kind of reading it is this has become a political imperative to bring people back in the office. They want butts and seats, and that's their philosophy, and that's what they're going to do. And that it becomes, when you're not met with a party that reacts to facts and reasoning, when we come to the table with all these reasons as to why telework, first of all, is not just better for our members for a variety of reasons that I just talked about, but also is better for delivering for Canadians. The employer on the other side is extremely stubborn, and in front of this very, this priority for our members, getting anything done is going to be an uphill battle, and it's going to require a very engaged membership. It's going to require the members to keep telling us how important this is for them, and to keep being willing to fight for it, because it's going to take a fight. We have to be honest with each other here. And so, mobilization, we're seeing a lot of increased mobilization efforts from the IT group to meet the moment and to join this, very difficult fight. And the pressure that different unions can bring is going to be critical in doing anything here. And the last thing I want to touch on, and Nate, you talked about it, the conciliation strike versus arbitration. There's an interesting case here because the IT group, formerly the CS group, they've been on the conciliation strike route historically is much more often than not. That's their default route for this bargaining team. However, in the last round, they were on the arbitration route. The reason why they were on the arbitration route is one of the core and main points of pain that they wanted to address in the previous round was that there was a disparity in pay between the CS, the CRA, they're so-called CSs, that are PIPS members. So the CS at the CRA and the IT and the core public administration had a disparity of 1.5%. They're doing the same job. The CSs at the CRA often transfer into the core and the core public administration, working in D&D, working at the SDC or shared services, and they transfer back and forth. But for the same job at the same classification level, for essentially the same responsibilities, they were paid 1.5% more at the CRA for reasons that I won't go into right now. So being on the arbitration route, and with the IT group felt, well, an arbitrator would look at these and they're so comparable that they would grant the pay parity, and that was the rationale before, for being on the arbitration route. This round, the IT group, they did their bargaining survey, they looked at their priorities, seeing how telework was the main priority, seeing how addressing pay disparity with outside comparables, especially in the private sector, and especially for the specialists. The group decided that conciliation strike was the best route to address these issues. So this is, as CAPE members are considering which route to take, this was the thought process behind the IT group's reasoning, and maybe that can enlighten a little bit your decision making, seeing, if your priorities are some things that you think a comparator in the federal public service has, an arbitrator may grant that. They may look at the facts, and you never know what you're going to get if you go in arbitration, but they may grant that to meet what a comparable bargaining unit has. But they're trying to fight for new rights and trying to meet new frontiers. The arbitration route isn't strategic choice for that. It could be for other reasons, but this is kind of what the IT thought and what other PIPS members are seriously considering as they're making their decisions in the next coming months.
Awesome. Thank you both for very thorough updates on this. It's good to see the way that you framed the issues, the way that the group decided to take one path or another on the issues, and then just kind of like the seeming stonewall on the big things, at least, that you're seeing at the bargaining table right now. A lot of the questions that were put out here today, especially on telework, were kind of addressed, I think, in your two talks. Maybe I won't just read all of them because I think they've already been spoken to. But I think this is more to PSAC, because Robert, correct me if I'm wrong, PIPS has not filed a ULP yet because you've not gotten that stage of bargaining, correct?
PIPS has filed one for the IT group, as the announcement was made after the IT group had served notice to bargain.
Yeah. So that's to both of you then. Just what is the update, and what do you think is like the likelihood that that ULP has any teeth? What can we kind of expect from that at this phase, but also down the road? And do you want to just explain quickly just quickly again, just for the sake of the question, what the unfair labor practice was about in very concise terms? Maybe we'll go to Robert first.
Sure, thank you. The unfair labor practice is because after we serve notice to bargain and the collective agreement is due to expire, after the expiry of the collective agreement, the terms and conditions of employment should be frozen. It's called a statutory freeze. And changing something as drastically as bringing people back to work one more day as we're in bargaining, we saw this as a violation of the statutory freeze and as a means to apply economic pressure to the members as we're in bargaining, and as part of what we consider should be seen as an unfair labor practice. So we went in mediation last week at the Labor Board for the unfair labor practice complaint. The terms in mediation were bound by confidentiality, so I can't really talk about what we were exchanging back and forth there, but I can say that we have more mediation dates scheduled, so we can conclude that we didn't resolve it in mediation. So we'll have to go back in a couple of weeks to see if we can make any more progress.
Thanks, Robert. Rachel, do you want to take a crack at that one too?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, there's not a whole lot more to add to what Robert has already mentioned. We filed for the exact same reason. The rumors start to swirl. Oh, PSAC filed because people are getting called back to work. Um, Technically, no, we filed because the exact same reason that Robert mentioned, because there was a violation of the statutory freeze provision by the implementation of RTO4. The only thing I'll add is what was even more infuriating is that for the bargaining sessions in lead up to the announcement in February about RTO4, we put the employer firmly on notice at the bargaining table, at every table, that we are hearing rumors and we will file a ULP, an unfair labor practice complaint, if the rumors come to light. We put the employer on notice formally that we were watching and that we were prepared to take action, and they still proceeded with that. So it just really speaks to the level of disregard, the level of just behaving with this degree of impunity, of a complete disregard of the collective bargaining process and the laws that guide it.
Absolutely. I just wanted, this isn't the same ULP, but just like CAPE did file a ULP as PSAC and PIPS did too, back when the RTO3 announcement came in. It was on the lack of consultation. But just folks, so you get a sense of like, because a lot of folks I think might assume that like legal remedies are always right there that are going to turn the tide on something. The remedy, our ULP on the RTO3 lack of consultation also is now coming to its conclusion. And guess what the remedy is for that? Consultation. So to tell us what about a decision that they've already made, about a decision that they're not even trying to justify, about a management right that is their management right until we take it from them as a management right, and that is the stakes of the conversation right now too. So I don't want I always like encourage us to file ULPs and take the steps that we need to defend our collective agreement and the integrity of the bargaining process. But on issues like this one, it feels like they were more than willing to take that risk, and they went ahead and did that anyhow. And saying to us in a certain way that the stakes of this are quite high and the fight will be a real fight on this, or at least that's the message that I got when I saw the PA group and the IT group kind of like taking those actions too. But the consultation that they gave for after months and months and months of outright denying that any changes were coming and that nothing was being considered, and why are we even bringing this up with the Treasury Board president? We got half an hour notice. I got half an hour of notice before they said RTO4 is happening. And they just kind of slammed the book on that too. So that's a level, like anybody who has any illusions now that there's a world in which we can sit down and work things out as adults, specifically on that issue, but on many other issues too, with the way that Treasury Board is treating the National Joint Council, is treating a lot of other tables where we used to maybe have some level of engagement on important issues, where we felt like we could at least have a conversation, even if fundamentally we had the most power in bargaining. The relationship is deteriorating in a lot of ways too, and I think that was driven by the employer on this one. Okay, sorry, I did a lot of talking there in the question time for you. I think a lot of people want to know, and this is going through the list of questions here too, just like what do the next steps look like then for negotiations? You both kind of touched on it at different points, but Rachel, I'm going to start with you maybe just because you had mentioned the PIC process and how PSAC is also campaigning to get rid of the PIC process and abolish it. And you've got some very good ads and comms products that are out there that I've been consuming recently. But if you could speak just what you think the next steps are for the PA group and other groups that have similar demands and are running into similar issues at the bargaining table, and speak maybe a bit to the PIC process too. So it's just so people understand that is a stage of conciliation as well.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we view the PIC process as just another delay tactic. There's representatives that review all of the proposals. We make, presentations, and what comes out of that is a series of non-binding recommendations. And then we take those non-binding recommendations, and depending on what the level of true engagement is at the bargaining table, we can try to work with those. But we have experienced in the past that it's been a meaningless process. It has wasted months and months of time, and nothing really substantial comes out of it. And that's not going to change in this round, especially in this round. Non-binding recommendations, as I said earlier, that's not going to move the dial. It's member mobilization that moves the dial, and unfortunately, the PIC process it's sort of like justice delayed is justice denied. So that is the request that we've made in our impasse application. We will know more after May 29th. If the board chair were to agree with our request, then we would, move quicker in the timeline. We would move into conciliation and begin that process in a quicker way. But the truth is, we're not very hopeful that the board chair is going to make a decision to skip the PIC process, and probably it's likely that we'll be forced to engage into that process. So that would then require months of preparation before the parties pick their representatives, before the PIC hearings happen, and again, members are just left then waiting for months and months. It's a little hard for us to say what's going to happen next. Obviously, we hope that the decision of the board chair will be in our favor, but based on past requests to skip the PIC and based on the landscape of what we're seeing these days, we're not very hopeful. So just in terms of the PIC, that's where we're at.
Yeah, I think just so everyone understands too, like the Public Interest Commission is, I believe, a mandatory part of the conciliation process. And this is one of this many layers to the labor relations framework that we operate in that was designed by our employer. It was like legislated by the employer and is unique in a lot of ways in the Canadian kind of like labor ecosystem in that it demobilizes by design a lot of workers' ability to come together around issues, get mobilized, and then you have to wait 6-7 months to hear from a public interest commission on non-binding recommendations that are probably not going to resolve anything, and that's why PSAC had been pushing for that for so long. But Robert, did you want to maybe speak to just what you think some of the next steps are in negotiations right now for the IT group and just for PIPS bargaining groups more generally too? I know there's other units that are expiring a bit later in the cycle too.
Yeah, for the IT group, we're at a different stage really because we are quite significantly behind the PA group. So we're still, there were a couple of placeholders in our proposals package. We have to fill them. Essentially, we had areas where the bargaining team needed to give it more thought as to what proposal they would do. So we need to present the full scope of what is on the table on our end. The employer also has a lot of placeholders, and we've asked them, you need to give us the full scope of what you want for us to really engage in bargaining. Otherwise, we don't know what's on the table. And some of these placeholders were extremely generic. And so we want them to be addressed so we know what's going on. I think we're really there. It's a very different space. But I'll say our first week of negotiations happened as the PA group announced that they were going at an impasse, and then the UT group of CRA right after. So it certainly had an impact on, okay, well, what does that mean for us? Do we, how much time do we really want to give this? Because it doesn't seem like the employer is doing anything of any, that's in any good faith with our brothers and sisters of the PSAC. So how do we deal with that? I think this may be something that the other groups will have to seriously consider and review what their own internal timelines are of, what are the likelihood of getting to a deal. So there's a lot of discussions being had internally, but in short, we are much behind. So we're still in the process of kind of normal bargaining, I would say, with the employer.
Absolutely. And we'll be right there behind you. Okay, so we have about 4 minutes left here. I think a lot of our questions that were in the submitted list have been spoken to in some way, shape, or form. I just wanted to put it to anyone who's listening right now. If you had a question that jumped out as you were hearing the presentations today, if you wanted to ask Rachel or Robert anything right now around the process and just general general process things or specific questions, I would ask you just to use your raise hand function and jump on. I'm just going to put that out to the group, and if not, I can wrap because I have many questions, of course, but I get a lot of platforms. Okay. I guess my question for you too is this is something that came up in both our TR group and our EC group, and not to get ahead of the bargaining platform information sessions. Oh, we do have a question. Maha, please go ahead. Just have to
Okay, yeah, I can. Hi. So, I don't want to play devil's advocate here, but I will. And I mentioned it briefly in the chat. Knowing what we know now from our colleagues at PSAC, thank you, and PIPS, the stance of the government vis-a-vis wage increases, return to the office, it would be almost, I'm not going to say futile, but we really need to change strategy as our turn comes. Because if we go asking the same thing and expect a different result, I don't think we're going to get it, right? I've heard, and this is where the devil's advocate come in. Like I've heard, we're more productive, transit, um, babysitting, all of these at the end of the day, they are not the employer's concern. The fact that I chose to live in Stittsville versus where I live right now, which is near downtown, I don't take transit, I walk. Plus, transit isn't a federal domain. Like, if we really wanted to complain about transit, we should be all 300,000 of us going to the mayor and say, what's happening here? So these are just some of the arguments that if we're going to use, we need to think them through. I think, um, and obviously through our own consultations, and as you mentioned, Nathan, we're going to prioritize our main objectives because we're just as diverse as anything right now. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you, Maha. I think a few people have said things that I would say to that, which is that, and I think that Robert and Rachel both have said that we've presented good arguments. We have a lot of good arguments laid out in our bargaining package and whatnot. And the employer on the telework issue in particular, that is not what will turn the tide on this. What's going to turn the tide is high levels of mobilization, high levels of support for your bargaining teams, and probably coordination across union lines on a lot of these demands. But Rachel and Robert, did you want to maybe close off with some thoughts on that?
I think as long as there's nothing in the collective agreement, or if there's something that's very weak, it will remain the management's hands, and it'll be very hard to have these negotiated considerations as to when a telework agreement is submitted, for example. And telework, I mentioned that was very important for the IT. It may not be as important for every bargaining group. I think every bargaining group has to adjust according to their own priorities. And you understand what those priorities are by the survey and by communicating with members and by doing all those things Nathan said. So I would just say, I highlighted why it was a big priority for the IT group. I think it's partly because they're ITs in the same team. They are across the country. There was a vision for the government that was implemented and then was pulled under them. So now they're stuck with they were hired in a reality that the employer is trying to pull away from them, which heightens why it's a priority for the IT, but it may not be a priority for everyone else. So, it's really important to negotiate these things according to what the members tell you. And it's also important to keep that open line of communication with the membership to continue to understand if priorities have shifted and moved since we did the survey, for example.
Thanks, Robert. And then Rachel?
Yeah, and I think, the only thing really to add, Maha, you bring up some, excellent points. And while, things like transit might not be the responsibility of the federal government, it's certainly a condition. It's certainly a consideration. And, where people choose to live, I mean, they made those choices based in a time where they were given the autonomy to be productive and work from home. And where someone chooses to live might not be the responsibility of the employer, but good, healthy, balanced employees is a responsibility of the employer. So that's the only thing I might add to that. But, you know, it's good that we think about these things, because while public opinion isn't really what we need right now, what we need is member mobilization. We are going to be faced with public opinion. So it's good to think about these things.
Thank you, Rachel. Okay, just again, thank you to Rachel and Rabel. Thank you for those, detailed updates. I think you gave us a good lay of the land of what we can expect as we go in with our two tables too. Just in terms of our two tables too, just as I close off here, for if you're an EC, our collective agreement expires in June, and before it expires, there's that one crucial step. You're going to be asked to vote on the EC bargaining priorities and on our dispute resolution process. You've heard from both speakers today that if telework is our top concern, which it is, there is not really a path to that through arbitration right now. And so the bargaining committee's recommendation, I'm just going to share this beforehand too, but you'll hear this in the information sessions, is conciliation because of that, and on every single other issue too, to make the gains that the bargaining survey and member engagement up to this point has told us. But the voting period is going to be online from 9 a.m. on June 10th to 9 a.m. on June 17th. That's an Eastern time. And leading up to that voting period, there's a series of information sessions, general meetings between May 28th and June 9th. And in order to vote, you have to be there for the bargaining team's presentation during at least one of 10 meetings. There's 10 meetings in a bunch of time zones. There's supports like childcare, reimbursement available. If you're unable to attend one of those meetings, you have to get in touch with national at acep-cape.ca. This is all on the website also, to find an alternative for you to hear the bargaining committee's presentation. But RSVP to one of the 10 meetings and find out more, click on the link that Anya's putting in the chat. And finally, just all of you, I encourage you to get involved in your department's organizing committees, where we've seen by far the most turnout for the bargaining survey, and on every single other thing is where there is an organizing committee. That's members systematically having conversations with every single member of the workplace on the shop floor. But the organizing committees are how you build power with your coworkers. That's why we're hitting the numbers that we're hitting right now. There's training, there's staff available to support you. So Anya, if you could also put the organizing committee, you did already, thank you, links in the chat. Those departments that have organizing committees that are up and running right now are seeing member engagement levels like they've never seen before, this night and day. But again, want to thank our guests again. So moved by the amount of support that we've received from PSAC and PIPS as we kind of launch into our bargaining process this round. Really looking forward to kind of continuing this conversation, talking about how we build power and how we move the needle on our key issues. Because the public sector right now is under attack, and it's only going to get worse if we don't have a big unified fight back. But yeah, I will see everyone at the information sessions, and thank you again to Rachel and Rabel. Have a good night, everyone.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much.